Everyone. We just want to say welcome, and we're so glad to see. I see some familiar names from last time.
Yes, thank you so much. I was in the part one, but I'm excited to be here for part two. So as I let people in, I'm just going to start by saying welcome to Helping Students Stay, Retention in the Adult ESOL Classroom Part 2 with Anita Kerr and Amber Fornaciari. My name is Grace Kadambidi, and I am the program manager at McHale, and I'm filling in for Tiffany Ross, who is the manager of network learning and development. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today as we learn in community how to better support adult ESOL learners in Montgomery County. Welcome to those who are attending a McHale event for the first time, and to our neighbors from DC and other nearby counties who are joining us today. If you did not attend one of if you did not attend part one of this workshop, you can view it on the McHale YouTube. I am going to put a link in the chat to part one. Okay. And you will still get plenty out of this workshop, even if you did not attend part one. We hope that today's workshop will give you some great ideas for helping the learners that you work with stay connected and engaged, whether you're teaching online, in person, or hybrid. And whether you have a classroom of learners who meet regularly or teach a drop-in class or tutor one-on-one, we hope that these tools will help with retention. This is an interactive workshop, so please engage by having your camera on if you're able to, or utilizing the chat and contributing in any breakout rooms. Today's session is being recorded, and you will have access to the presentation in a follow-up email. So now I am going to introduce Anita and Amber. So Anita Kerr has been working in the field of adult ESOL for 20 years. She teaches at Lincoln Land Community College and has taught ABE/ACE and ESL. In her current role with the Illinois Professional Development Network, Anita designs and conducts training for Illinois adult educators and serves as an educational training specialist focusing on language arts. Amber Fornaciari has been working in the field of adult education for over 10 years, both as a teacher and a trainer. She teaches at Elgin Community College and has experience instructing all ABE/SE subjects in both virtual and in-person formats. In her current role with the Illinois Professional Development Network, Amber designs and conducts training for Illinois adult educators and serves as an educational training specialist focusing on math. I will pass things on to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. It's great to be here with all of you again. We're happy to be here with Maryland for workshop part 2. And you're totally right, Grace. It's fine if you were not with us during part 1. That's okay. There's still plenty of information and ideas that you can gather from today. But we will do a tiny bit of review from last time to benefit those of you who maybe it's been a while since we were together, or if you were not with us during part 1. I'm Anita, and I'm happy to walk you through the first part of our workshop today, and then Amber's going to take over in the second part. So just as a reminder, kind of the focus of our training from part 1, we talked about how retention is a complicated issue. We talked about the complexity of retention and how it's not just one barrier that our students face, but it's multiple barriers that our students face to retention, and that we wanted to concentrate on what teachers and tutors are able to do and where they can have influence over retention. That was our focus during part 1, and we're going to maintain that focus here today. We acknowledged that there are lots and lots and lots of barriers to retention that our students face. Personal barriers, work-related family barriers, academic barriers, all of the things that maybe cause them problems with being consistent in their classroom. However, we don't always have a lot of control over those components of our students' lives. And so we acknowledge the reality of those barriers. And instead, we're going to choose to concentrate on the actions that we as teachers and tutors can take to have an impact on student retention. So we're narrowing our focus a little bit when we talk about student retention, which is such a big and complicated issue. We're narrowing down and focusing in on what we can do as educators to actually influence our students and how often they attend and how regularly. So that's a little bit of a concentration of kind of where our focus is for this session. So we're going to start with a little bit of review. And we like to do this because it allows us to kind of touch base with you. So maybe the first place to start, if you don't mind, would be in the chat for our Zoom. If you wouldn't mind opening your chat and telling us, yes, I was here for part 1, or no, I was not there for part 1. And we'll just give you a second to respond in the Zoom chat, please. Just a yes or a no would be great. And this is not to make anyone feel bad. It will simply help Amber and me to know how best to talk with you today. Great. Thank you so much for your quick response. Great. We have a very mixed group, it looks like. About half of you, it seems, were here and half not. So that's totally fine. We're very happy to have those of you who are returners and those of you who are new. So we're going to go to our next slide, and there we're going to talk about a little bit of review. Amber, you have control of the slides, but I don't think I do. Thank you. Right. Okay. So here's our review to start with today. If you were with us last time, you might remember this data that you're seeing on the screen. But we want to review from here anyway as a good starting point, because these are the 4 primary categories that we talked about for student retention that teachers can have control over. So you'll see here that when we, a set of instructors, this was a Florida study, were surveyed. These are the 4 key areas for retaining students. You'll notice the most important thing here was student engagement and motivation. The next was positive and collaborative teacher and student interactions. That includes not just teacher to student, but also student to student. Multiple instructional approaches and student goal setting. So what we would love to do to help get your minds thinking about retention and maybe remembering back to our previous session, if you were with us, is we would love you to keep that Zoom chat open. And we would love for you to give us an example of a couple of these categories. So student engagement and motivation seems maybe the simplest to understand, right? The idea here is that students are actively engaged in their learning, that they are, excuse me, that they are interested, and that they are motivated, not just from you motivating them, but maybe they're experiencing some good self-motivation. I apologize for my cough. What we would love to see is a couple of examples in the chat of the positive and collaborative interactions.
I love watching this, everyone. The content relevant to your lives, the positive affirmations, just knowing their names really helps. I love that, William. Thank you. You know, something I saw just this week that I'll just add while you guys are typing in the chat here. I just saw that Google Workplace, if you're a Google user, has a setting where you can change, you can record the pronunciation of your name and have it be a part of your Google profile. And so if you, like me, I have a hard name to pronounce, spell, the last name at least. And so that was something that in the business world, at least, or in the education fields, that was a cool feature that I saw Google did. just to make sure that your students or that anyone could, and if they had your email address, they could know how to say your name without even knowing you necessarily, right? So if you are a Google user, that right there just makes people feel comfortable. I know when I mispronounce names, sometimes you know it, right? And you're like, oh, I know I said that wrong. And I just keep on asking my students, help me again. Yes. I love this. I love looking, they exchange cell phone numbers or set up a WhatsApp line. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Peggy, for that. Group messaging within WhatsApp. What's interesting to me is, and Anita and I have had several conversations about this, is that within WhatsApp, or I'm sorry, within the ESL community, or the ESOL community, WhatsApp is so widely used that many of the students have it, right? But in the ABE ASE community, sometimes they don't, and they've never even used WhatsApp. And so it's interesting how even just those two communities can operate differently as we move forward. Ooh, I'm gonna have to look into Viber. I don't know what Viber is.
I was just thinking the same thing. What we would love next is, if you don't mind, you did such a good job on that one. Could you give us some examples next of multiple instructional approaches? Maybe those of you who were with us last time remember what that's about and could give us in the chat maybe an example.
Yeah, I'm kind of reading the chat. Visual or audio, yes. Presentations, activities, discussions. Maybe some of you remember that pyramid we presented last time of passive versus active learning and what some of those things were. Games, songs.
Look at that comment from Peggy.
Oh,
Different
yeah.
skills, emphasizing different skills at different times so students' strengths will be displayed. I love that. Yeah, this is great. You guys have the right idea for multiple instructional approaches. This is kind of the idea that if everything is always presented in exactly the same way, students tend to, number one, get bored, and B, it might not be the method of instruction that works best for that student. Maybe they would do better with video or audio rather than print. Or maybe they like group work as opposed to individual work, or vice versa. The idea would be that students would be engaged in different ways so that their strengths can be emphasized, that their weaknesses can be met. And it has to do with having a teacher or a tutor who knows that the way I learn is not the only way to learn. And so I can't always teach the way that I'm comfortable doing it, because the way that I'm comfortable is not always the way everybody learns. So it's a unique idea that we need to have multiple instructional approaches. And the idea you can think about as one example, I don't think I saw in the chat, that we talked about last time, is letting the students serve as a teacher in some small way, letting them teach a skill, or letting them step up to the front of the room and help people understand something. Or maybe if they're on the job that's related to what you're teaching, have them come and share something to the class. But letting the students be the teacher, quote unquote, for a little bit is one of the most active instructional approaches that you can take. So maybe there are some ways that you could think about doing this that you haven't thought of before. I also love all the ideas about gaming, and gamifying is what they use that term, to allow students to interact with each other in some happy, competitive ways. Great. Anybody have ideas related to goal setting that they want to put in the chat? In what ways do goal setting approaches impact retention
or maybe something you remember from last time about goal setting that you would want to share. We'll give you just a minute to use the chat for that, for the last category there of goal setting. And thanks for all your participation. This is great.
Oh, William, I'm going to need to check out your flow chart and see. William says in the chat that he had weekly goals written into a flow chart that builds into goals for the entire session. I love that. I'd love to see that and how that works for your students.
Yes, and Carol talking about breaking down those big goals or the generalized goals into smaller achievable goals. That's absolutely true. Yeah, short term versus long term, definitely. Great. We're actually going to look a little more closely at goal setting here today as kind of our focus area. So we will get back to this with other ideas. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a Google Doc. This is, for those of you who weren't with us last week, that would be a resource you might want to take a look at. We collaboratively, everybody who was on part one, put together some ideas for retention strategies that could be used in the classroom or in the tutoring sessions based on these 4 categories. So open that doc and maybe let it sit there on your computer for a minute. We will also be able to share some resources with you at the end of today. And that document will be one of those resources. So you can access it for sure, even if you don't open it right now. But it's a great, what we call a brainstorming document, where teachers and tutors together brainstormed about all the retention strategies they could think of around these 4 categories that they're either currently using or could use in the future. We really like that document because not only does it have really great ideas that you could borrow from, but it shows how eagerly this group is thinking about their students, how eagerly and strongly they want to maintain their students' retention. It's a very, it's close to your heart. It's an issue that you're really working on and thinking about. So that document, we just wanted to make sure you have access to. So we'll come back to the resources in a little bit near the end to make sure that you have access to all the resources that we have so you can look at them on your own time. So we want to revisit one other kind of important idea related to retention. As we talked about how complex retention is and how many different facets or how many different ways you can think about retention, one of the ways we want to emphasize with you today is the different levels of impact that our choices as teachers and tutors can have on student retention. The information that's being shared here comes from a pro-literacy research brief a couple of years ago, and it's related to adult education retention. And they were asking what kinds of actions have the most impact on students staying in class? What kinds of actions that teachers can take have the most impact? So some of their research showed a couple of things. Things that are external to the class, meaning something you might do to reach out to a student through a text, sending them a motivational message, or a quick reminder when they have missed class that you missed them and you want to see them back next time. Those tend to be simple things that we can do, that we should be doing, and they do have impact on student retention. But if you move to the next level, it's like jumping up a level of impact. Our impact increases on student retention when we change things in our support system for students. So this would be things about preparing them very well giving them clear expectations and understanding during their registration or orientation period, providing some sort of counseling supports or kind of a case management supports around their education, and then peer supports, having in place in the classroom or in your program students who can support students. Those kinds of impacts that you can make in your program have an even higher impact level on student retention. So it's not that any of these are not important, but it's like what changes the data in the student retention the most? Little text reminders, that helps. Improving your orientation and your support system for students helps even more. Guess what helps the most? What impacts the retention data more than anything else is what you do in the classroom. Instructional changes and improvements that you make in your class or in your tutoring sessions, those have the strongest impact on student retention than anything else that your program can do for students. Amber and I found that not only very encouraging, because that means that we do have a lot of control and influence over student retention, but we also found it a little bit intimidating, right? Some of this falls to me to make wise decisions about how I instruct in the classroom, because it does impact what happens with my students in terms of their attendance. So what we hope is that as we're doing a little bit of review and kind of putting this retention discussion in a context for us, that you're already starting to think about some things that you might want to do differently with your students to help them stay and to improve their retention. So we're going to look at our first activity today, which is we are going to think about setting a goal for ourselves. You are not the student today. You are still the teacher, the tutor. And what we want to do is think about for your kind of long-term retention goal for your next set of classes or your next set of tutoring sessions. Maybe you're taking a break over the holiday, for instance. Great. In January, maybe you think of that as a new term or a new set of classes or a new set of sessions. However that works for you, what we want you to do is not so much think about the past and what you wish you could have done. We'd like you to think future. And starting in January, what is a goal that you could set for yourself that would be related to your students' retention? Now, I'm going to give you a couple of thoughts around that. Maybe if you're teaching a classroom setting, there are particular types of students that you need to be reaching out to in a different way. Are you tending to lose maybe your younger students, or your lower level students are tending to leave? Is it your working employed students who tend to leave? What's the group of students who are maybe struggling the most with retention? And can you identify that student group to think about how you could reach out to them? That's one approach. Here's another. Maybe you're thinking, okay, in general, I don't really have any particular student groups I need to reach out to. I want to think about one or two specific strategies that I want to try in my classroom this next term or this next session. This is the idea, is that you are setting a personal goal for your own classroom or your own instruction related to your retention. Now, we know that goals need to be attainable, right? They need to be small enough that they can be measurable. They need to be actionable. You need to be able to control the thing. You need to be able to make a decision. And they do need to be measurable. So let's look at an example, shall we? Because before I ask you to do something, it's not really fair unless I show you what I'm looking for. So here's an example. This is from a couple of you guys had participated and sent in some activities for us between part 1 and part 2. We enjoyed reading those very, very much. This is an example of one such person who made a specific goal for their retention And their goal is over here on the right in white. And I want to show you what it says. My retention goal is I will make the first week of class centered on building community and providing support. So this particular person decided that week 1 of their class was going to be their focus, not the whole semester, week 1. There's your first choice. And they chose to focus on 2 things. They were going to center their class on building community among their students and providing support where it was needed. Now, that's a great goal. What is missing from that goal? Maybe some specific steps. So guess what? Over here in the green on the left, here are the 2 specific steps this teacher chose to make. Over their holiday break, they chose to create a toolkit of get-to-know-you activities that are simple and interactive and specific for adults, right? Not childish, but adult learners. And they decided to hold off on classroom diagnostics until the 2nd week. Meaning, instead of having students come in your door and you greet them and you immediately sit them down and give them an assessment, instead of doing that, they're going to build some community in their classroom and let learners get to know each other a little bit and save those assessments for a couple of sessions. That's a choice that this teacher was able to make. Their second strategy is to include in her class welcome email the name and number of their program's counselor and the kinds of obstacles to attendance that he could help with. In other words, hey, as you're just getting started in my class, I'm not your only support. Our program has this person who can also help you. And let me tell you about him and what he can do in advance. Sometimes when we get started in our class, things are so busy. We're learning student names, we're getting things set up, we're getting organized, we're doing logins and tests, and sometimes we forget some really important information. So maybe an email that goes out to students or a WhatsApp message that sends them to a document that has some info on it would be a good idea. So this teacher particularly wanted to focus on building community and providing some additional supports for retention. So this was her goal and her steps to achieve her goal. So that's our example for the day. And what we would like for you to do is to do the same. We would like for you to think of a goal and either particular student groups you want to approach or strategies that you want to try to get your goal achieved. And your goal may be quantitative, right? It might have numbers to it. I want to see this percentage of my students retained by this date. Or it might be more qualitative, right? Like I want to build community in the first week. You can't really put a number on that, but it's still an important goal. So it's a qualitative goal. Both are perfectly acceptable, and we would love to see what you have to say. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask you, if you don't mind, hopefully you have a little piece of paper next to you, or maybe you have your phone and you can type some notes into your phone. We'd love you to actually write your goal down. If you remember from last time, we learned that's one of the things that's a really important factor in goal setting is writing it down. It locks you in a little bit and makes you accountable to it. So we're going to ask you to please jot down your goal. You can find a piece of paper near you, or if you're on your computer or your phone, you can type it in a little note or a new document and put that goal on paper. So we're going to give you just a few minutes of quiet to do that. I know it's kind of funny in a workshop that we said is engaging and active. It is, but this active part is quiet. So I'm going to mute myself and give you a few minutes to write down your goal about retention. And remember, this is for you personally in your instructional setting, whatever you're going to be doing next semester. What could the goal look like for you? I'm going to go quiet. We'll let you work. And if you have a question about what you need to be doing, please put it in the chat and we're happy to answer that for you. So take a few minutes to write down your goal for us, please. Now that we've given you a couple minutes to think about your retention goal for your upcoming set of classes or sessions, we're going to give you a chance to talk about those goals with your peers. This to me is one of the most valuable things that we get to do in a workshop, is rather than just listen to someone else talk at you and you thinking and processing is to talk to each other, the other people who are kind of what we say in the trenches, meaning they're doing the same thing you're doing. And to hear from them what they're thinking can prompt new ideas. It can spark encouragement from each other, all of those things. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms and let you talk to each other. It's okay if your goal is not perfectly worded, and ready to publish. That's okay. The idea is for you just to share a little bit with your group about what you're thinking about what your goal would be and how you're going to implement it next semester. So Amber's going to take over and put us in breakout rooms here in just a minute. And if you don't mind, Amber, if you want to tell them their instructions, that would be great.
First, well, thank you so much for writing some of you started putting your goals right in the chat, and that's completely okay if that's where you were taking your notes. I want to encourage everyone to remember that we're asking for you to have a goal towards retention and to make sure that it's focused on something you can do, meaning something you have control over in your classroom. We know that all those barriers like employment and transportation and all of those things come in to play, but what can you do as the teacher? What strategies can you pull? So the idea in the breakout rooms is that you're going to share your goal, and if you have a strategy, if you don't have strategies, guess what? We're going to give you some more today. So if you don't yet have great strategies, share those in your breakout rooms. In just a minute, I'm going to open all breakout rooms, and there should be an option for you to join the breakout room. Usually it's a blue button. It comes up as a small screen. You'll be in there with 4 or 5 people. So, and we're going to give you about 12-ish minutes to be in the breakout rooms and talk amongst each other. So a couple minutes per person to just share your goal and see what is going on in your room and connect with others to find similarities within your own goals in regards to retention. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the breakout rooms. And so you're going to look for that button to go into your breakout room. It seems like everyone is back in the room, and I purposely turned my video off because I'm going to share my screen with you, and I really just want you to focus on what's going on my screen. So I heard some discussion in the groups. You guys should be able to see my screen now. I heard some discussion in a group or two that I was kind of hiding in, if you will, about how it seemed, I heard someone say it seemed easier to come up with strategies than it did to define a goal. And I think that that's so interesting because that's what we're asking our students to do, right? Is to have a very concrete goal. And so being able to do that for ourselves is so important. And I hope that throughout the rest of this time that we're with you today, you develop your goal even more. And I want to say that writing a goal is also not, you're not writing anything into finality here. We're writing something, your own goal is yours, and you can change it as it needs to be changed. We're going to talk a little bit more about each of these strategies and the goals, but we're going to switch a little bit here into goal setting for students. So we've just asked you to focus in on your goal and what your goal is as a teacher for retention. But now I'm going to ask you to kind of switch gears a little bit and start to think about goal setting for students. I already set this up a little bit here and said, if we want to model goal setting, then we need to know how to write out our goals, our own goals, right? And sometimes that means doing it with a different context. That can be one way. You could say something like, my goal is to eat 3 vegetables every day. What if that's the goal, right? And then build off of that. But I wanted to share with you some of the resources we've gathered throughout our time doing this work with retention in regards to goal setting for students. And you will have access to all of these resources. Remember, if you were here last time, then you might remember the Padlet that we have. You should see that on my screen now. It's got like a purple background. And that Padlet has an entire goal setting resources section. So the first thing I want to show you, this is a cool feature of Padlet. It'll turn it into slides for you if you want it to. We have an activity for ESL students, and these range in level. So keep in mind that any of these resources you can take and adopt for your level of learner. Don't feel like you have to adopt them the way they are. So this first activity is called 3 goal setting ideas for the first week. It's a kind of a lesson plan, if you will, focused on 3 and 5 is the first activity. Students will write the following: 3 things they already know or do well in English, and 5 things they want to learn to do well in English. It's always important to identify our strengths as we are talking about our goals, right? What am I already good at? What can I build from there? Students share it in small groups. A spokesperson reports out from the group, and then the teacher records the information. It could be on a computer or on a large sheet of paper or on the overhead, lots of different modalities, right, for you to do that. And if they're, as long as students are comfortable, you could even share these. If you're a tutor, maybe you're doing more one-on-one work, you could share these with other students as long as you ask their permission, right? Is it okay if I share with other students what your goal is? And they can start to develop, well, how look at their goal. What are they working on, right? To form a little bit of community. A lot of you talked about having WhatsApp groups. I've even heard teachers talking about making a WhatsApp group for their tutorees, right? They're people they are tutoring, so that even though it's being done in isolation, those students still have a connection to other students. Another idea is to create a graph. Students will create a graph illustrating how much English they presently use at work or home, in the neighborhood, how much they predict they will use. This is another way to kind of tap into this idea of a quantitative value, right? Right now, how much of your reading is done in your native language or a language other than English, and how much is done in English? And what do you want that to be in 8 weeks? What do you want that to be in 16 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 days, right? This is one way to kind of visualize as well as quantify learning and be able to give students breaking or goals that are broken out into smaller pieces, right? And some students, I know in my class, a lot of my students that speak other languages, they have different goals for each of these categories: the listening, the speaking, the reading, the writing. Sometimes their goal is far more the speaking than it is in English than it is the reading and the writing. They're not as concerned with the reading or writing. And so this really makes a student feel like they have agency over their learning when they're tracking the goal that's important to them. Right. Another idea is to incorporate a 4 corners activity. Each corner of the room, you could put a piece of paper, or you could just assign them and say, corner 1 is to get a better job. Corner 2 is help my children. Corner 3 is become a citizen. And then you ask them, what is your number 1 reason for taking this class? And they move their body. They physically get up and they move to that corner of the room. So everyone can kind of see how different, but also how similar the goals in the room are. So just some quick goal setting ideas for just the first week. And this is just, for the first week, or maybe the second, or the first time or two that you meet with a student. I think I talked about these last time, but we also have some what is a goal worksheets here that another practitioner in Illinois shared with us. And actually, I want to go to the next one because, oh no. The first one is specific to what is a goal, right? What does it look like? And maybe sometimes we need to teach students what is a goal before we can have them write their own. And so in this case, look at the pictures and write the answers on the lines. And this could be done in a variety of ways, depending on the level of your students. What do they want to do in this picture? They want to, right? We're having this sentence frame here of what do these people want to do? And they might say they want to get a point, right? Because they're playing soccer, or they want to get the ball in the net. That's their goal. But then we have other contexts here. What do you think these people want to do as far as their goal? What do you think this picture is showing you for a goal? What is the goal of this picture? And then what is the goal of English class, right? What does that look like? So a very simple, low end.
think we lost Amber for just a minute. She'll be back and we'll jump back in with us. But I want to jump in and help you guys finish this up here while Amber is out. Her internet has been acting up, so I'll jump back in and help finish up. All right, so one of the other goal worksheets that's available is goal setting with beginners. And this one also is picture-based. And it has, and the idea here is I need more English because. And remember, we may have talked about this last week. Students tend to think in generalities. They tend to think when they talk about goals, unless we teach them otherwise, they often talk about, I want to improve my English. I want to speak better. I want to listen better. Those are truly awesome goals and wonderful, but they're not very measurable, specific, or attainable, right? So we can help them break those down. This worksheet is wonderful because I need more English because. So the I need more English is great, but the goal doesn't just stop there. It asks them, why do you need more English? And so it has some pictures to help prompt them towards the reasons why they might need more English. So we really like this worksheet, again, because it's simple, it's picture-based. You could use it for your low-level learners, but if you had a combined group and you had some higher level, maybe you had some more English under their belt already, they could maybe write out their own, whereas others might just check the box, right? So you could use the activity in a multi-level setting as well.
All right, Anita, I'm back for now, so I'll
you're
talk. I'll
Yep.
talk, and you can run that screen for me. This is
Yep.
the definition of teamwork right here, guys. We're
We hadn't
not
even
usually
started
this-
talking about the lesson plan yet. We're right
Yep.
here.
Great. So as we're talking about goal setting resources, and one of the others we want to kind of give you a tour of here is the goal setting lesson plan. And this was done by one of our ESL master teachers in the state of Illinois. But this one is very, if you want to click on it, Anita, there's some very clear reading and ELP standards here for you. So if that's something you're familiar with, this is a resource. And this also allows for you to see the vocabulary that's included with goal setting, the learning objectives, using goal setting in a short written or oral text, distinguish between short-term and long-term, explain the importance of setting goals personally and professionally. So this is a very robust lesson with lots of things in it for you. There are some resources in the form of websites here for you that are, a quick note on getting better at difficult things. So even some readings to go off of, right? If your students are at a level where you're able to read those, that would be great to read together. And then you're hitting on even more than one skill. You could certainly even make this an entire kind of multi-day lesson, right? Where you're reading something about goal setting, we're working on developing a professional goal or a personal goal. Here in this lesson, Erin talks about what is something you've achieved that you're proud of, and what did you do to be successful? So again, framing that idea of you've already achieved lots of things. Let's talk about those for a minute. Modeling that from your idea, and then where have you heard the word goal before? And this is a great idea to kind of incorporate some of those worksheet ideas, right? Like in the context of sports, for instance, what's the goal in sports and what could be an obstacle in sports? And then connecting that to this abstract thought of what a goal is. You can also talk about, you could read those articles that are presented from Common Lit or ReadWorks. If you're not familiar with those websites, they're great for our adult ed students. Put students into groups based on their article that they read, and then pulling out that vocabulary as you go along. So I'm not going to read the entire thing to you. I think that you can do that for you. I know that we are going to share these with you, so I want you to feel like you have this in your back pocket. Note, I just want to point out at the very end there's a little bit of a mini presentation to the class. So everyone would be giving a mini presentation to the class. That's the idea behind this lesson plan, at least, related to the vocabulary of goal setting. And there are also recommendations at the bottom for low-tech classrooms, synchronous classrooms, and remote asynchronous classes. So thank you, William, for putting that in the chat. He said that we did that and it created a lot of community. I'm so glad to hear that. So this is just another resource for you. And I'm going to have Anita go back to the Padlet if you're able. There we go. And go to the next piece of the goal setting. And we're actually going to talk a little bit more about this goal, this particular force field analysis. We might have shown this at the first webinar, but what I want to show here is that it is listed as a resource on the Padlet for you. And it's a theory among, it's a theory to map a path to your goals and create supports around your goals. And it also helps you dive deeper into goal setting conversations. In just a minute, we're going to go back to that force field analysis, but we're going to go ahead and go forward and talk about a resource Anita and I recently found out about that we just couldn't wait to share. It's called Future Me. It is write a future self email about your goals, and then set a future date for the email to arrive so you can reflect on what you've accomplished. It's amazing what some of these apps and tools do now for us, right? This idea of a scheduled email. You type an email to yourself. It's like a letter to your future self. Right now I'm working on the goal of learning English, for example. I hope that when you receive this again, just what a great idea. Penning a letter to yourself, and then having it actually sent to you. And so it's pretty easy. It's a pretty easy interface too. You notice Anita just opened it up and it's right there. You type in the box, you say, I want it delivered in 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, and then put your email in. And you can just send that letter for free. If you want to support the agency, you can, but you can just send the letter for free. And then that's literally all there is to it. There's no other, advertisements or trying to get anything else from you. There's no login. It's just, dear future me, write myself a letter, email it to me in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever you choose. Or apparently you can also just choose a date. So out of the resources I've shared so far, which I want you to throw in the chat, which do you feel like is something that you're going to check out either right after this or maybe in the next time before you meet with students? Maybe it's one of the goal worksheets. Maybe it is the lesson plan, the future me, or it could be just those 3 weeks, those 3 ideas for the first week of class too. Which one is grabbing you or grabbing your attention?
I like the suggestion somebody just put of doing a goal setting lesson or activity and then having them write the future me letter at the end as kind of a culmination. I love that.
Ooh. William says he'd do it a low tech, do it on a note card. They get it back at the end of the session. And it might not have impact on a singular session, but rather over the course of time. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah. Thank you so much for putting all of these in the chat. If you don't mind going back to the slides for me, Anita. The piece of goal setting that Anita and we kind of laugh about, but also in all seriousness, it is our downfall. It is our vulnerability here with goal setting is, how are you going to help your students monitor goals? We have all these great resources for setting goals, but monitoring them and keeping up with our students' goals, not necessarily knowing what they are, but just having them check in about their goals and having them monitor their own goals. And I remember doing this in other contexts before when I was teaching, for instance, in the K-12 system, where I was monitoring student goals and they were having to track things. And one of the simplest ones that I'll mention that I don't necessarily agree with anymore, but was tracking, for instance, math facts and whether they had their math facts memorized. But I remember that there were some students that were so motivated by being able to see their progress and being able to see how much they had achieved within a certain amount of time. And that sticks out in my memory when I teach with my adults. Um, that sticks out in my memory, yeah, when I'm teaching adults, because I want my students to monitor their own goals. I am not, they are adults. I am not, I am a facilitator or a guide. I'm not their parent. I am not someone who has authority of them, over them in that way. I want them to feel like they can monitor their own goals even outside of my classroom, because we know that language is not acquired uh, in 3 months or 6 months or even a year. It takes, research says what, 5 to 7 years to fully acquire a language. And that's not even all 4 parts necessarily. So this idea of being able to track their language themselves. And Pam, do I think goal setting is too complicated for very beginners? No, but I think it is hard for them to write it. I think it might be hard to write a goal at the very beginning, but I think that there's a reason they're in that class, right? There's a reason they came to class, that they registered for that class or they registered for the tutoring session. And so however that comes out might be, it might have to be translated, right? It might in some way, shape, or form in order to resource. Yeah.
You're breaking up on us, Amber. You might have to wait for your internet to reconnect here. I just made a note to finish that thought about working with really low level students. Maybe the language around goal setting is too complicated for them, but I think some of the worksheets we provided that are picture based would be a good alternative to that, as well as maybe using language like I want as opposed to goals. That may be a more simple language that could be introduced. I want, and what do you want? I want to learn, or whatever it might be. Pictures, acting things out, whatever you have to do. We know that since we're working with adults, they certainly have the capacity to understand what goal setting is. They might not have the language in which to frame it, but hopefully we can come up with alternatives for that. But yeah, I think how much emphasis you put on the development of your goals, the writing them down, the holding them accountable, that could vary depending on the level of student you're working with, for sure. And that goes for really everything that we talk about or any professional development you hear. It's always good to reflect and think about how that might work in my setting with my group. And do I need to adjust it at all? And I think that's always a good self-reflection to do. So I appreciate the thinking there. So we're going to move into an, Amber, whenever your internet's back, just interrupt me. We're going to introduce you guys to one other concept that we really, really, really liked as far as a resource for strategies to help and support our students. And again, this will be on the list of resources we provide for you here at the end. So we'll give you this website, but I want to show you how it works. It's something called the Learner Variability Model. And the idea behind this is a research-based program. And the idea is that students have individual factors that affect their performance, their attendance, their participation, their engagement. And every learner is different. That's why it's the variability model. They're all different. But based on what factors my student has, there are certain strategies I can apply as a teacher that will have direct impact on that student and will help improve that factor. So the idea would be that here you can see on my screen, there's a list of factors for learner background and academics and other things here. And you would click each factor that affected the student that you're thinking of. Maybe you have a new student, maybe it's a student you've had for a while that's having some issues. You would check the factors that impact that student. And then over here on the right, a listing of strategies would pop up of things you could try that would have a positive impact on that student, on what they learn, how they learn, and how well they can stay and attend. So I want to show you what this looks like in practice. So here's the website. And if you go to the factors page, here's what I was mentioning. All of these are listed out as factors. There are learner background factors, social and emotional learning factors, cognition, which is their thinking or their intelligence, and then adult literacies.
Right.
And if you ever wanted to know more about these, you just click on it and you can learn more about a particular factor.
Right.
Are
And
you
Anita,
back?
remember, we already kind of put those categories back. We already did that category work kind of in when we were talking about barriers, right? In our first webinar we were talking about, and they kind of fit into all of those categories we talked about before. And so when you are kind of checking the boxes, you could almost think of those things. And some of them on here are definitely ones that you as an instructor don't have control over, right? For instance, a student's sleep, you don't have direct control over that. I mean, you can suggest things, right? Or their vision, you don't have control over that. But what are some strategies that can impact their learning in a positive way? And notice, for instance, if you have a student who has an issue with vision, then they list 8 different strategies here. One of them being audiobooks, another being mentoring or coaching, video relay or replay analysis, excuse me. So, analyzing those short clips. Text to speech technology has come a very long way from when I was even in my pre-service teaching programs. And so, even simulations and immersive virtual environments, depending on any tech tools you're using, there are certainly different experiences there. And so those are just for vision. But if you go and you click more than one, and it could be a variety, right? We click motivation, a sense of belonging. Maybe you notice a student there who has a deficit in that sense of belonging and motivation, but also has maybe an issue with attention, paying attention, or short-term memory. And you notice the strategies on the right are all changing, right? That's the beauty of this tool. And what happens then is you have this output of all of these different strategies that you could use for a student who fits those specific barriers to learning. And so notice here, there are some things here that I hadn't really ever thought of. And that's why we like to share this with our participants, because we really want you to be able to see what are, metaphors and analogies. Those usually sound like something that I wouldn't do for my ESLO students, right? But maybe there's a place for that in some of the higher level. And notice the metaphors and analogies there. It'll give you an overview, how to use it in your learning environment. And then my favorite part, which is additional resources that help you with this. So we'll show you another example there. Excuse me. For instance, game-based learning. A lot of you talked about game-based learning. What can we do with game-based learning outside of maybe you're like, oh, my students are kind of tired of bingo or Quizlet or whatever you're using, for Kahoot. Although I don't know, some students love Kahoot no matter how much you use it. When you go down to the bottom there, you have things like the different examples, gamification versus game-based learning. That's an interesting kind of very relevant, trendy topic right now, this idea of gamification versus game-based learning and how those are different. The other thing that this variability model will often offer is professional development resources. So if you scroll down just a little bit, you notice there's a game-based learning versus gamification and multiplayer professional development opportunity there. So then maybe that's a video. There's also research. And so this is such a great resource for you. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat so that you have it if you want to explore it. This website is entirely free. I will mention, if you scroll up just a little bit, Anita, if you can see there's a login page, you don't have to click it, but if you do register for the website and it just takes an email, you can save your searches. So that's the big benefit of having an account here, is you can click some learner backgrounds and then save strategies that you want to come back to at some point, instead of having to kind of start over each time you visit the website. So I've put the link in the chat to the learner variability model. If you, as we're working towards the end of our webinar here, we only have maybe 10 minutes or so left. A lot of this is resource talking this time, but I'll also say that we're trying to, as trainers ourselves, as PD specialists, we are trying to take our participants to a little bit of a paradigm shift in regards to retention. And one of our own participants said it best. They said that after they had gone through this training or a similar training that we offered, that they changed their mindset from, we're just going to lose a bunch of them anyway, so it doesn't really matter what I do, to how can we make attendance attainable for all? And I really appreciated that mind shift there of, instead of I'm just going to lose them, so I'm going to do whatever I do and we'll see how it turns out, this idea of actively making attendance attainable. And for you, that, and for your students, that might look different depending on your classroom situation, your schedule, the system you're working in, and the student that's in front of you. But I want to encourage you to also come at retention with this particular mindset as you move forward. One of the things that I saw someone put in the chat earlier, that their students often have surprise shifts at work. That happens to my students too. And they had a great idea in the chat. They said they were going to like kind of have a letter drafted that the student could present to their supervisor to just reinforce the concept of how important it is for them to be in class. And my encouragement to that would be, yes, that's one great strategy, but what else can we do to make attendance attainable for that student? And that might not be in your control, but it could be that we offer students a way to access material outside of class when they have to miss because they don't have a choice, right? And I know that for some teachers that have taught maybe in the K-12 system, it can be difficult to let go of this idea that if they're not there, they don't get the content. But with our adult students, it is often that they can't be there. And so they need another way to access the content of our classes. So I said we would come back to this, and here we are. We've talked about your retention goal, then we talked about student goal setting. And now we're coming back to your retention goal. So what is your goal for your students, for your classroom in regards to retention? And we're going to use a tool that is in the Padlet called the force field analysis. The idea being, in regards to your goal, who or what makes that goal hard? Who or what helps your goal? And then analyzing whether there are more positive or negative forces. And then what are those forces that strengthen or weaken the outcome of your goal? As we're preparing to get ready here, I actually think that maybe
It sounds like Amber's breaking up on us again, unfortunately. I'm going to see if I can read her mind and ask you to reflect on this right now in just a few quiet minutes. Rather than go into breakout rooms, let's stop and just think for a second. Go back to the goal that you wrote earlier for your personal retention goal. And maybe draw this little quadrant on a piece of paper and fill in the quadrant based on your goal. So for example, if my goal was building community in my classroom during the first week, I would, in that first quadrant, start thinking about who or what makes that hard. What makes it difficult to build community that first week in my class? So I would maybe list 2 or 3 things that make it hard to build community. And then in the second quadrant, I would fill in who or what makes it easy to do that. Maybe I have a teacher's assistant in the room who helps me do that. Or maybe I have returning students who are going to help me do that. And down here, you do a simple math question. Do I have more positive or negative forces? Meaning more hard things or more helpers. And then depending on which is higher, you either want to strengthen some of those helping forces, or you want to think of ways to weaken those challenging forces. What are some things that you could do to strengthen the things that are helping you, or to weaken the things that are hurting you? So that's the idea of the quadrants. So I'd love for you to just think for a few seconds about what your quadrant might look like if you filled it out based on your goal. This would certainly be something you could model for your classroom, for students with their personal goals. Certainly for higher level students, this would be easier than for the lower level. But what it does is it really pushes them to think about, okay, I wrote down my goal, but how exactly am I going to achieve it? What are the things that are in my way? And what are the things that are helping me and that are going to be available to me to help? And so it really lets them put their goal into action in their minds a little bit and see how it would look if they're really meeting that goal. So we'll give you a couple of seconds to think through maybe some of the forces that are helping your goal or actually pushing against you. And how could you change some of those?
Well, I'm so glad to be back. I keep disappearing and reappearing. I appreciate your patience with that for these interruptions. And Anita picked up right where I left off. I could hear it, and it was great. Thank you so much. So as you think about that force field analysis, I hope that in front of you, this piece of paper or this document that you've opened, you've input some of these things so that you can continue this process of professional development and reflection on your retention goals. As we look to support you in the future, we've been here twice for an hour and a half each time, but we want to have this Padlet of resources available to you, and it'll be available to you as long as Padlet exists, I guess is the is the quantifier there. But I'm going to put it in the chat, but it will also be sent out to you in a follow-up email, or so Grace says. So that'll be on her in the future here. But the Padlet of resources is here to share, comment on, and this is something that you as a community can come back to as well. That Padlet we showed you earlier, we've made it so that you can add things to it. It's not just Anita and I that have power here in this. So if you see the yellow plus sign, that allows you to add your own ideas to this Padlet and allows you to contribute to it what you feel is what you feel has been helpful as you move through these goals. Move through the goal of retaining your students, excuse me. The other thing is I'll share with you is that the slides from both of the presentations we did, workshop number 1 and workshop number 2, are in this left-hand column for you. So as you are looking for, oh, I really want those slides, or I really like that brainstorming activity, we have it all here for you in one place. And so we're hoping that this is helpful to you and find a way, and that this, that you find something here to be helpful to you in your effort towards better retention in your classroom. You can also just contact us at any point. I mean, we certainly are not the experts in the world on retention, but we are very much involved in the research and talking to those involved in the research about retention. And we are practicing as well, right? We are in the classroom with students trying out different strategies to retain our adult students. And so we're in the trenches, as we like to say, with you and trying to retain our students just as you are to yours. We want to thank MCAL for inviting us today. as well as last time. And thank you for your patience as we dealt with a few tech issues today. We hope that you have a wonderful weekend as well as a happy holiday season. And thank you so much for inviting us.
It was great to be here. Thanks. We'll turn it back to you, Grace.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Anita and Amber for such an engaging workshop. I know that I especially found the section on goal setting as well as the future me and the idea of weakening challenges especially engaging, useful, and very, very informative. Um, Thank you to the program administrators who joined us for today's meeting, sorry, for the instructor that joined us for today's meeting. I am going to put a survey link in the chat. If you could please fill that out to provide us with feedback. Let me put that right now. And thank you to you all. And I wish those who celebrate a wonderful and happy holiday and well wishes to the end of the year for those who don't celebrate. Thank you.